Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
A long-running scandal over Prince Andrew's ties to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is thrusting the British royal family again into crisis, with the release of a harrowing new memoir by the late Virginia Giuffre, one of the most outspoken victims of Epstein's sex trafficking ring. Her book lays bare in sordid detail a tragic portrait of a young woman forced into sexual encounters with many men, including Andrew, throwing fuel on a cascade of allegations, shadowing the king's brother and a monarchy grappling with diminished public support. I'm Caryn Ceolin, and today on The Big Story, I'm joined by Sarah Sahagian, co-host of the Reheat and publisher of the news website rabble.ca, to talk about the allegations against him, the calls for further action from the king and parliament, and why Andrew may never lose the title of prince. Sarah, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So Andrew was already banished from public life. He was stripped of his honorary military titles. Then last week, he surrenders his royal titles and his honors. And we'll discuss in a moment, why he's giving up those titles now. But I wonder if at all, is this a bitter blow to give up such a title? Like, how unusual a step is this?
Well, it's pretty unprecedented. I mean, it's not that it has never happened before that people have abdicated from a title. I mean, The Crown, if you want to see the early seasons, talks about that. We've even had kings step down, but it is fairly unusual. And it is stepping down not because you fell in love with an American divorcee, but in this case, it is stepping down because you have probably done something very shameful, or allegedly you've been accused of shameful acts, and certainly shameful associations with somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, who Andrew knew, we have plenty of documentation, was a pedophile. And there is reason to believe, very credible reason to believe, that Andrew himself had sex that was not consensual with a child.
I wonder, though, beyond perhaps humiliation, in practice, what does a diminished status actually mean for Andrew? Because he remains a prince and he still retains the dukedom.
You're right. So the dukedom has gone into abeyance, which I think is important. So he has voluntarily stopped using the title. I mean, I'm using voluntarily in quotes. I think his brother, the king, put a lot of pressure on him to do this. But he has technically voluntarily done it. It's in abeyance, meaning he could keep using it if he wanted to down the line, if he feels like the scandal kind of dissipates. However, there are discussions now in Parliament about whether there should be an act of Parliament to officially take away the dukedom, which would be so unprecedented. So I think this is a really interesting turning point for the monarchy, which is really showing how the monarchy, in theory, isn't above the law. In theory, they are subject to the same laws. And this would be an opportunity, if there were an act of parliament, and I don't think there will be, but if there were, to put that into practice, to show we will ensure that you are not held to a different standard. I read Virginia Giuffre's really heartbreaking biography, Nobody's Girl. And in it, she describes her horrifying encounter with Prince Andrew, and she says that he felt, quote, entitled to have sex with her when she was just 17.
It was his birthright, she said, right?
Exactly. She referred to it as his birthright. And if you think about it, the very institution of monarchy, it's not surprising it breeds entitled people. It's basically saying some people, because of the way you were born, because of an accident of birth, are special, right? You get special titles, you get money from the government, you get these special homes. And it's not a stretch to think that that would extend to being able to satisfy any even horrible impulse you have.
I do want to, ask you about the allegations being leveled against Andrew in a moment, but just to come back to your point about officially removing his titles and the dukedom being an act of parliament, I think that's almost what's particularly very unique about the situation, because historically the palace and parliament, they stay out of each other's business. The royal family stays out of politics. The prime minister stays out of the family drama. But now both are under the same political and moral pressure to kind of take further action here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that a very important thing to remember about King Charles is, yes, he is the symbolic head of British government, because he is the king, he's also the head of a religion. He's head of the Church of England. It's a religion I'm actually part of. And in that role, the Church of England has started to take things like this a bit more seriously. Justin Welby, the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, the previous head bishop, kind of was an apologist for Andrew. And now they will be appointing Sarah Mullally, who is very progressive on things like LGBTQ rights and is a woman, their first female head of the church. So I do think that when you are both a king, when you are so important as a symbol for the government of a country, and you are the head of a religion, it is really important, even if it is your brother, to take a stand against things like this. And I think this symbolic distancing, saying Andrew's not invited to Christmas, Andrew is not a duke anymore, is really the only way for the monarchy to have a fighting chance. The monarchy, I would argue, has outlived its usefulness. But if it's going to stay relevant, it really needs to adapt to current social mores. There is this saying that the monarchy, in terms of its values, is always at least 2 or 3 decades behind the times. And I think that this is a signal from Charles that whether, I'm not saying that we should give him kudos for this or this makes him virtuous, but that they are trying to adapt and they are trying to make sure that they take things like sex crimes against children seriously. It's really sad that that is, in my opinion, probably at least partially a PR move, but I think it arguably is.
Yeah, I wonder how much of the royal family's action against Andrew stems from a genuine place of wanting to hold him accountable, because, as you mentioned earlier, Giuffre's autobiography is just devastating, versus it coming at a time when opinion polling reveals really a steady drop in support for the monarchy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's also a really interesting dynamic, which is that there have always been rumors that Charles and Andrew don't get along, that they don't see eye to eye. There is that rumor that many people believe that Andrew was always the Queen's favorite. Andrew, in his youth, was seen as a very dashing figure. He fought in the Falklands. He flew helicopters. He had a nickname. His nickname was Randy Andy in the press, which wasn't really an insulting nickname. It was kind of more, oh, that scamp. It was affectionate. He dated Koo Stark, who was an actress who was horribly slut-shamed in the press and was famous for doing work that was a little bit more sexually explicit than some other actresses. But definitely he was this beloved figure when he married Sarah Ferguson. Their wedding was watched by millions. They had this whirlwind romance. So it is also a family, and I think people need to remember that there are always family politics at play, and we will never truly know what Charles thinks of his brother or what Andrew thinks of Charles.
I want to talk a little bit about, the why now. And obviously this all culminated with the release this week of a new memoir by Giuffre. But there have been really a parade of damaging allegations leveled against Andrew over the past week. I mean, including that he's been caught up in a spying scandal involving China. Of course, the publication of Giuffre's book, the email that he sent to Epstein. I mean, what would you consider the most damning here?
It's hard to tell. And I think that that's why he's such a liability for United Kingdom, in addition to being a liability for the House of Windsor. It really is hard to tell what his biggest misstep was. This is a person who seems to have categorically bad judgment. And I mean, there was also the fake shake scandal that the Duchess of York got caught up in. And they still cohabitate, even though they are divorced. So I would definitely say, however, once you've read Virginia Giuffre's book, you cannot forget what she says. It's very graphic in its depiction of really disgusting sexual violence perpetrated against her by many people, including Prince Andrew. And even if his only crime were being associated with Jeffrey Epstein, I would say that would be enough, because we know that he continued to be associated with Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and convicted of sex crimes. So I think it's really hard to tell. This is overall a disaster about a person who we cannot look the other way. This is a pattern of behavior. There is no redemption here, in my opinion. This is a 65-year-old man who lived his life with lots of entitlement. Parliament is now considering investigating his finances. I don't think we can walk it back. I think the only way for the monarchy to survive is really just to distance themselves and say, he's not one of us anymore.
Yeah, is there anything else the royal family can do in terms of taking further action? Because I imagine too complicating this is the fact that Andrew has not been
Mm-hmm.
convicted of
Mm-hmm.
a crime.
Well, and I think that if he were to be convicted, you might see more distancing. His lease on Royal Lodge, where he lives on the estate of Windsor, I've read is pretty ironclad that they can't just end that lease, even if they might want to, even if they don't want him on the grounds of Windsor. So it might be that this is the extent to which he's punished, that he just becomes a social pariah. People have speculated that he will not be invited to William's coronation when William becomes king. That doesn't surprise me at all. I feel like that is a no-brainer. Uh, but I think it's just going to be probably a fairly lonely life. His daughters, who by all accounts are lovely young women, remain close with King Charles. And so I believe they will still attend royal events. They're not trying to collectively punish his family, although it should be said that the Duchess of York has stopped using that title. If you look at her social media handles, she is no longer using that title that she retained after their 1996 divorce. So it is definitely a humbling, but it pales into comparison with what happened to Virginia.
You mentioned earlier how the palace has made clear that he would be banished from Christmas celebrations. And so you think then that this is, a calculated move and sort of meant to demonstrate that he won't have that access anymore to royals like Charles or William.
Well, absolutely. And even just as a parent, I'm putting myself in the shoes of people who go to this event, people like the Duchess of Cambridge, who has sort of a tween daughter. I just wouldn't feel safe if I had a family member who'd been accused of being a sex criminal who preyed on young women who were not much older than my daughter. So I do think that there would be no possible way to justify having him at this event. And furthermore, going back to the rumors, we kind of know that Charles and Andrew were never that close. So I don't anticipate this being a huge loss. I think that anyone who wants to make this a really super noble sacrifice on the part of Charles, I think he is doing the right thing, but I don't really think it's a huge sacrifice.
I wonder what you think this tells you about the change that might be coming when, Prince William becomes king, because he said as much in a recent interview that, change is on the agenda. What does this tell you about what kind of king he might be?
I do think that William wants to see a more minimalist royal family. The royal family has been criticized for a long time for being just too big. Too many people are in the fold. Too many people are living on the estates of these official royal residences, Andrew being one of them. Andrew still lives at Royal Lodge. And I do think that you will see from William a more pared down monarchy. And I think that that's really out of necessity because they need to counter the perception that they are leeches leeches who take advantage of the public purse. So I think that that's part of it. I also just think that when you have too many people into the fold, it is much harder to manage everyone's behavior, to keep track of everyone and make sure that everyone is an upstanding citizen. So I, for one, want to see the monarchy get smaller. As much as I'm fascinated by the monarchy, I do not believe hereditary monarchy should exist. It's a very interesting institution, but it is antiquated, and the only way for it to survive is, in my opinion, to shrink. I think William knows them. I think he's signaling that.
But you do see Andrew maybe living out the rest of his, at least, contract at Royal Lodge.
Yes, I don't think that there is a way that they can break that lease, as much as I do believe they would like to. And listen, Andrew has his own money. I mean, some of it I think was procured legally. He has a pension from his time in the Royal Navy. Some of it, there will be further investigations to see if perhaps there were some shady deeds that secured that money from him. But he could be an independent person. This is somebody who could go rent a flat somewhere in London and be fine. But the lease is a legal document. And so in this regard, at the very least, I do think that the king is in a difficult position.
And Parliament too. Like, I wonder what you make of this chicken and egg dilemma, because the government essentially has left the job of punishing Andrew to his family. Like, do you think that stands with the British public?
Yes. I think that the government does not want to take a chance of punishing him in a way that the public decides is disproportionate. I think one thing that people need to remember is that while there are certainly British people who do not support the existence of monarchy and who are very critical of it, there are others for whom the monarchy is a beloved institution, and they do not want to see members of the royal family punished in the way that an ordinary person would be punished. So I think that it would be too controversial. And yes, I think it kind of some of the politicians in the UK want to take what I would say is the safe route, the easier way out. But also, when you're in politics, one thing that's always top of mind is getting reelected.
I think probably too the broader geopolitical context of this all, there are risks for the government, because not least being the precedent that it would set in terms of like politicizing the crown, but probably wants to keep the royal family close because it's leveraged its cultural influence to strengthen ties with Trump.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the UK monarchy is worth a huge amount to the economy in big ways, yes, where they serve as diplomats. And so you definitely don't want to create too many scandals. And when there are scandals, you don't want to draw too much attention to them. But even just in terms of the fashion industry, Princess Charlotte alone is worth billions of dollars to the fashion industry. So the tourism industry, fashion, diplomacy, all of this really isn't, I mean, I wouldn't say it relies on the royal family, but it is tied to the royal family. One of the things I always say to people is that Britain can't afford to get rid of the monarchy. As much as it is unfair to have people who get all of this largesse from the public purse just because of who their dad is or who their mom is, it does bring in a lot more money than it costs the United Kingdom.
I still want to ask you about the title of prince, though, because obviously you mentioned earlier it would likely require an act of parliament, but there's nothing Charles could essentially do on his own without that backing from parliament to kind of shed that title from his brother.
Well, the saying is prince by birth. And so I'm not actually an expert on the legalities of the royal family. I'm not a lawyer, and I want to say that it doesn't seem like there is an easy solution for this. I don't know if other people have discovered one. I think that a lot of scholars are going to be researching this to see what could happen. It would also be quite controversial because the Queen was a beloved figure, and I think we have to remember that. And taking a title away from one of her children that he received from birth, I do think is something that people would find controversial, not because they love Andrew, but because they loved Elizabeth II. So I think that is unlikely to happen, even if it were something that could be done easily.
And probably should mention, too, that she helped finance that undisclosed payment that he made to Giuffre to settle her lawsuit, which, of course, he did without admitting guilt. But so essentially, he's now like a palace pariah. His position has been more precarious since the Queen's death. But at least he'll be prince, I suppose.
Yes. I mean, he's no longer a member of the Order of the Garter. He no longer is a duke. And he's no longer going to any events, but I mean, he will be able to tell people at the pub that he is a prince if that is something he wants to do.
I mean, given the complexities of any further action that the palace or parliament could take against Andrew, and that you've so kindly laid out for us, you also mentioned earlier that you don't see any path of redemption for him. You don't think there's any simpler form of redemption that he could potentially take?
I think if there were, it doesn't seem like he wants to change. This is a person who has repeatedly lied about what he did, who has now been accused of asking the police to look into Virginia Giuffre to try to smear her. This is somebody who, it really does seem like the way he's described in Nobody's Girl, feels it is his birthright to do what he wants with other people. And I don't know if there's redemption for that. It seems like he truly believes that he is above the law.
Even if you make him a pariah and you isolate him from the rest of the family, how do you disassociate the two?
I think that the monarchy will survive. I don't know for how much longer. I do think that everyone will allow William to ascend to the throne. I think that that is going to be the true test. I think in the United Kingdom, whether or not you like Charles, and definitely Charles has historically been a bit more of a controversial figure, there is a lot of affection for William because he is the son of Princess Diana, because he is the grandchild of Queen Elizabeth II. I think that reign will be the true test. If he can't make it work, then I think the monarchy is not long for this world. But I do believe that William is going to work with expert PR people. They're going to craft a strategy and they're going to figure out how to bring the monarchy into the 21st century. I don't exactly know what that strategy will look like. Part of it will be a smaller monarchy. I don't think you're going to see as many royals on the public purse. Part of it might be actually taking a stand on issues. I mean, I know that the royal family's mantra has always been never complain, never explain. They also aren't supposed to be political. They're supposed to be neutral. The way they have interpreted political neutrality is a little bit more extreme than I think it needs to be. I mean, I remember several years back at the beginning of the Me Too movement, everybody who attended the Black BAFTAs, women were encouraged to wear black in support of Me Too. And Kate didn't do that because that was viewed as too political a statement. I think you're going to see a monarchy where you can do things like that, even if you don't pick a partisan side in an election, where you can say things like the sexual assault and harassment of women is wrong.
Last question I want to ask you, because, they're in the midst of kind of tackling this crisis, which has been a major public concern, Andrew's ties to Epstein. Do you think this propels the royal family to address another area of public concern, which, as you've mentioned, is their impact on the public purse?
Well, I would like to see them spend less money, as I think everyone would. And I do think that the monarchy should exist as a way to stimulate the British economy. I think that that is their role in the 21st century. I do think that for some people, they're important symbols of the nation. For others, they're symbols of colonialism. So, I think that the only way they are really, in my opinion, justifiable to keep around is if they are stimulating the economy by getting people to buy a bunch of paraphernalia from a royal wedding or making people want to take a trip to Windsor Castle. So I think that that is the future of the monarchy. This might be a cynical take. I know many people still love the monarchy, and they will always be of interest to me as an Anglican. But I do have to say, I did not baptize my daughter because I was a little bit upset. Well, I shouldn't say that. I did not baptize my daughter because I was very, very upset with the way the church had treated Andrew and the fact that Bishop Welby had basically been an apologist for him. And I felt that as the mother of a daughter, I couldn't justify bringing her into that religion, despite the fact that I'm a confirmed Anglican, and the Anglican Church was very, very welcoming to my family, some of whom arrived in this country as refugees. Now that I am seeing that Andrew has been essentially exiled from the family, I am reconsidering that. So potentially in the long term, I do think if they actually make good on modernizing and embracing more intersectional and inclusive values, there is a way for them to stay relevant.
Sarah, I appreciate your analysis as well as your personal insight today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was The Big Story. You can, of course, hear more of Sarah's thoughts on her podcast, The Reheat. I hope you check it out. You can also send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. As always, you can also leave us a voicemail, 416-935-5935. Would love if you could share this episode with a friend or a family member. Please rate, review, follow. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Caryn Ceolin.